Joining us today is Bryan Moore, President and CEO of DBA Architects, a leading mixed-use master planner in the Dallas-Fort Worth market. DBA, like a lot of other firms, has seen an uptick in demand for micro-communities, and Bryan will discuss the sustainable impact of designing walkable communities and how they encourage physical and mental health. Welcome, Bryan.
Hello, how are you?
All right. Bryan, let's start our conversation by defining what a micro-community actually is. Are there parameters about acreage, number of homes and businesses, and so forth?
Not really parameters. It's more just the distance that you're living from your work. You're walking, having to walk from your actual living residence to community, commercial, retail, restaurants, churches. All the services that the amenities, I guess you will, of life that you want to be close to. That you don't want to have to get in the car to go access those services.
Okay. Are there certain areas of the country, or are there certain areas of municipalities that sort of lend themselves to this more than others? I mean, have you found that this is more prevalent in certain areas than others?
Well, it's kind of naturally created in heavy density urban areas. It's kind of naturally created. When you get out into the suburbs, they're more and more they're trying to create the nodes, I guess, if you will, to where they're lack of a better word, they're kind of artificially creating
Hmm.
the macro communities in the suburbs. People, especially with the cost of fuel and inflation, these kind of communities are really becoming more and more appealing to especially young people. They want to live in walkable communities where they're not having to get in their car, they're not having to travel long distances to live the kind of lifestyle that they really want.
Hmm. Aside from the cost of fuel, are there other factors that are giving impetus to the demand for these types of communities? I'm thinking maybe along the lines of this great resignation phenomenon that happened to several, last year, and whether or not people are just kind of rethinking their whole live, work, play lifestyle.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people are, I recall when we first started DBA Architects, I mean, our offices, it was an hour and a half commute, both ways. This was back in the late 80s. You're in the car for 3 hours to get to your job, and like you said, COVID and the great resignation, people are just like, I'm just not doing that anymore. I want to live, I want to work, I want to play, I want to recreate, all within walking distance, so that it's I there's no commute, there's no having to go get in the car. So yeah, that's a huge factor. Just they want to simplify their life, and all of that was brought about, COVID. There's been some positive changes, with the pandemic, that
Mm.
out of that, people, they just life's too short. I'm not going to spend 3 hours in the car every day to get to a job. Yeah, so
I used to work in New York City, and after 9/11, I started working out of my house, and I could never go back to that level of commute again. I mean, it was taking me an hour and a half to an hour and 45 minutes each way to
oh right, yeah, same thing. And I just like I say, I live in the suburbs of Dallas, and so our offices were down in the city center, and so literally it was an hour and a half in the morning, an hour and a half at night, to get home. And so you finally realize I'm spending 3 hours every day sitting in the car, sitting in traffic.
Mm.
So I think maybe the younger generation, maybe they're just smarter than us. They figured out, like, no, I'm not doing that.
Mm. Bryan, when you develop these types of communities, what generally comes first? Is it the business, the business component, or the residential component? Is there a rule
So
of thumb there to any extent?
well, okay, so there's a lot of dynamics at work, of course. um, you know most municipalities, most jurisdictional authorities, whether that's a county or a city, they don't want apartments. They don't like apartments, and that has a lot to do with their tax base. So it's almost like the chicken and the egg. You have to have a synergy of people living there to use the retail, the restaurants, the things that the cities want for their tax base. So it almost has to happen simultaneously.
Uh-huh.
It has to be, well planned, well thought out, where and the worst thing you can do is build a commercial, and then the businesses all go out of business because there's nobody using their services.
Mm.
And so it's a fine balance you have to walk with a lot of these, townships and city councils. Of course, they want tax base, they need tax base, but you also got to have residents. And the worst thing that can happen is you have all this commercial business that goes out of business. So you've got all these boarded up, buildings. So it kind of has to happen simultaneously. And you have to get some forward thinking people. And that the best way to create that density, where you create the synergy, where you have enough people to support these businesses, you've got to do high density residential. And that's a concept that most of these city councils and most of these, it's not in my backyard type situations. They don't want the residential, but you have to have both. You just have to. And so it's a hard fight to convince a lot of these jurisdictions that it's got to happen simultaneously.
Mhm. I'm glad you brought up the high density component, because that's certainly one of the sustainable impacts of a walkable community. Can you cite a couple of others that come into play?
Well, high density obviously is a big deal, and then of course with high density, that brings in a lot of cars, and that's the other thing that a lot of these cities have got to get away from. I mean, they don't want urban sprawl. They don't want urban sprawl, but yet they have these unrealistic parking requirements. I mean, we've got neighborhoods in Florida that we're doing that, some of these jurisdictions, they want 3 cars per unit. And you're just like, that's just a ton of concrete. You just, and here, even here in Texas, we've got a lot of municipalities, they want 2 cars per unit. So they have to get away from you have to deal with the automobile. You have to accept higher density. You have to accept, lower parking requirements. You have to get away from, a lot of these places are going to these form-based codes, which are great. Don't get me wrong from an aesthetic standpoint, but you have to allow developers to be creative, and the way they write their ordinances and their planning, their zoning, it's almost kind of like paint by numbers. They want you to do this and this and this, and you can't do that. You have to allow, and most of these cities have, they have mechanisms like plan unit developments or special use districts where they allow you some creativity. But they've got to get away from the paint by number design master plan aspect of the way their ordinances are written.
Mhm. How does wellness come into play here? I've heard you and other firms talk this up in a big way, but can you elaborate on that for me a little bit?
Well, sure. So these communities, like I say, they have to be designed where they hit all aspects of the traditional neighborhood design, which was really started in the 80s. But it's live, work, play, recreate, and also you have to add into that the spirituality part of it. So these communities, from a wellness standpoint, they have to hit all of the aspects that make for a quality life. So you have to have in these neighborhoods, churches and synagogues and mosques. You have to have places where they can recreate. So you have to leave open space or just places where they can walk their dogs. So mental health, being able to recreate, being able to work out, have fitness facilities, overall mental health, physical health, spiritual health, all of that has to be designed into one package and all walkable so that they're not, stressed out all the time, about being stuck in traffic or, just the commute, the physical part of, fitness, as I said, spirituality, recreation, partying, have restaurants and bars and movie theaters and things within walkable distance so that their live work ratio is easily attained.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit more specifically about a couple of projects that your company has worked on recently. I'm speaking about Sterling Manor at High Street and Stinson Village. I was wondering if you could give our audience a little taste of what those are like.
Sure. So Stinson Village is right across the street, right across Martin Luther King Boulevard from the University of Cincinnati. And that was designed as a mixed use, high density. It was actually, the primary purpose of that was to provide professional housing for the University of Cincinnati's medical center, which is right across the street. So it was for the doctors, the nurses that were doing research and actually, working on graduate level work right there across the street from the medical center, and high density residential, both for sale and for rent. It had office space for doctors. It had retail, restaurant, pretty much all of the things that we were kind of limited on land, so there's a lot of aspects of the live work play that we weren't able to add into that, but it's right across the street from a pretty large research university, so the things that we couldn't hit in the live work play model were right across the street. Sterling Manor is in Williamsburg, Virginia, just a few blocks from Old Town Williamsburg. Williamsburg is like it is like the antiquing capital of the world. So there was apartments, there's condos, there's townhouses, there's restaurants, there's retail, it's pretty much all the aspects. There's a church, there's a bank, all the aspects of the live work environment were hit in the city of Williamsburg, and it's caters. Whereas Stinson Village in Cincinnati, Ohio, was more a younger, tailored more toward a younger crowd. Williamsburg was more towards an older, retired community type situation.
Does that reflect the city in itself, or is that okay?
Yeah. Once, like I say, one's across from a college campus, so you have young people, going to school, matriculating. Then you have Williamsburg is a more of a retirement community, or people flock there for like I say, antiquing and things that are more appealing to an older generation. So it was tailored more towards their liking.
You mentioned earlier a project that you're working on in Florida. I'm curious about what the dimensions of that might be. I mean, and how it reflects the general population.
Well, same thing. It's catering more toward an older demographic. As you know, Florida is like the retirement capital of the United States.
Yeah.
And it's down in southern Florida, in Fort Lauderdale area, and it'll be tailored more towards an older generation, more. It's more of an active seniors type community, so that it'll have rehabilitation facilities. It'll have retail that's more oriented towards them, restaurants more oriented towards them. So it'll be more of a wellness type community. It's a place you can go and live out the rest of your life and have health services close by, recreational services close by. We do a lot of work for Dale Webb, which is a Pulte company.
Sure.
Yeah, and it's more like that. We'll have single family residences. It'll have a large amenity center that has, indoor outdoor pools, bocce ball, the kind of things that appeal to an older generation.
You mentioned Del Webb. I didn't think about this when we first talked about doing this interview, but I'm wondering, are the national builders getting into this the kind of this walkable community thing in a bigger way?
Yeah. So, for sale single family residential permits are way down because of, a lot of factors, the economy and interest rates and things. So more and more of these larger builders are getting into the single family for rent type neighborhoods.
Yeah.
So, or also what they're calling a living trust, where they provide housing for elderly type or older generations that are retiring that can be passed on to another generation. But the single family for rent is really huge. We've probably got 4,000 single family for rent units on the boards, various under construction on the boards in design all across the country. Florida, Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, Arizona.
Hmm.
All the areas that you would deduce that's where people are going to retire to,
Yeah.
and those are really large.
Hmm. Oh, how does your firm look at this trend long term? I mean, do you think that it has legs, or is it somewhat or more of a niche? I mean, what's your prognosis for the next several years when it comes to micro communities?
I hope it's not just a fad, because I think it's a better way for people to live. The younger generation, when we were first starting out, it was, you got to own a home, you got to be in the neighborhood, and that's just not the way the younger generations see it. They don't really, they want to live in a vibrant, walkable community where they don't have to keep the yard, they don't have to paint the house every 7 years. So I hope it's not just a trend, and I think I think it probably will last. I mean, there's some areas, LA, Dallas, Houston, those places are, we're just vehicular oriented. But I think in places where it's more urban, an urban feel, or even in Florida, where a large majority of those people are migrating to Florida from New York, and New Jersey, where it's high urban areas, that's the way they're used to living. So I think it's more than a fad. I think it has legs, and I think it'll last.
Hmm. Bryan Moore of DBA Architects, thanks for joining us today, and thanks for spending some time with our program.
Thank you, John. Appreciate the opportunity.
And thanks to our audience for joining us. This is John Caulfield from Building Design and Construction Magazine.